Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, October 13th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the states and Senate seats in the 2026 midterms the Democrats should really be focusing on in order to win back Senate control by the end of the decade. On your screen right now are all of the states that are up in the 2026 midterms. Democrats currently hold 47 seats here, meaning that they are either running for re-election in these seats, or they have retiring incumbents, or the races just simply are not up for election. Republicans have the majority of 53, and the 2026 midterms have been ones that have really been, caught up in the Democratic bubble as to whether or not they actually have a feasible pathway to the Senate majority in 2026. And that's sort of the purpose of this video, to really look at things on a scale of priority. If all was going well for the Democratic Party, what are the states that maybe they should be focusing on the extreme? But what are the states that should be the first order of business for Democrats in the 26 midterms? And we're going to go through all of those states, all of these seats here, and really start to take a look. What is the priority for the Democrats as they focus on the 26 midterm elections? Now, on your screen, like I said, all the seats that are up, a lot of them are going to be now taken off from being considered safe. What we're focusing on this priority scale are both Democratic and Republican states that should be the priority for the Democrats here. We're going to include a caveat every time we characterize a state that is currently held by a Democrat, because the priority seats for actually winning should be looking at the offensive, because Democrats do not have the majority in the same way they did going into the 22 midterms. This one, they're coming at quite a deficit. And it's not to say that this is something that cannot become, overcome in the past decade, right? Historically speaking, at different periods of time, Democrats in 2014 lost the Senate majority 54-46, and it took incremental gains from 2014 to 2020 to eventually get Democrats back in control of the U.S. Senate. They held it for 4 years after that, lost it in 2024. And the question really will be, on this scale of priority, how do they get to a pathway of the majority, and what does it look like if things are starting to go great? Now, in terms of the priority seats for Democrats, I think the most obvious ones that if they were to outline the states that should be immediately targeted right now on the Democratic side, there are two easy options: Michigan and Georgia, that absolutely are of the utmost importance for the Democrats in 2026, because without them, there is no pathway to the majority in 2028 or even 2030, assuming all goes well. Because these states serve as the foundation for Democrats in 2026. Without them, Republicans expand their majority to 55, giving Democrats the least amount of seats they have seen in the Senate elections in a very long time. I mean, you're not going to find a time where Democrats were down to 45 seats. It still go back to 2004 was the last time we saw that. And Democrats actually won back Senate control just 2 years later in 2006. In a midterm election that was very good for the Democratic Party, that we will not see replicated in 2026, right? States like Nebraska were going to the Democratic Party, North Dakota, Montana, West Virginia, Missouri, Tennessee was down to a margin of just 3 points. So when you think about the last time Democrats were able to come back from that type of margin, it was a vastly different America, a vastly different electorate. Today, it just simply wouldn't happen. So those states absolutely come out to me as the priority scale number one. They're going to have the safest characterization on that front. But as we take a look, too, on what should be that, focus and priority, I would say on the Republican side, immediately what comes to mind is North Carolina and Maine. Now, allow me to explain a little bit. If Democrats were not to invest in any states besides these four, I actually think that would be not the best campaign strategy, but certainly one that I think really shows that they know ball, at least when it comes down to 2026. I do not see a conceivable pathway to the Senate majority for Democrats, barring a massive collapse on the GOP support in states like Ohio and Iowa. Maybe you could see it through Texas, depending on who the Republicans nominate, but even that part is still very much up in the air. So looking at it from where would be the first pickup opportunities for Democrats, it's going to be Maine, and it's going to be in North Carolina. In North Carolina, you have Democratic Governor Roy Cooper, who had served as governor for 8 years, served as attorney general, served as the president of the North Carolina Senate, has never lost an election in any of his history in running in North Carolina, and running for Senate this time around is breaking fundraising records and is already leading in the polls. Democrats have a very real possibility of flipping a Senate seat in North Carolina for 6 years at least, with a governor who is tremendously popular and has done very well for the state, leading Democrats into victory in 2024 in the governor's race as well, as he vacated his position. In Maine, you have Susan Collins. The Republican senator who has been in office since the 90s, has been here for a tremendously long time, and also is popular to some degree, but her popularity has faded in the day and age of Donald Trump's second administration and arguably even the first administration, where her margin went from 2014 winning by 35 points to winning by just 8 6 years later. And if that trend line continues, it stands to reason the Democrats could flip this seat in 2026. And in terms of investment, Maine is a smaller state population-wise. They threw a lot of money at it in 2020, but in 2026, given that it won't be coinciding with the presidential year and Susan Collins' approval rating is far lower than it was in 2020, especially looking at that exit polling data. In 2020, her popularity may not have been great, but of those who voted, 49% of them approved of the job that she was doing as senator. Looking at 2026, we could very well see a further collapse that makes it so the Democrats could come in and swoop in for victory here. So Maine, North Carolina, Georgia, and Michigan stand to be those first line of states that Democrats should target. But if, assuming all these seats go blue, Democrats still don't win the Senate majority. So that's where we want to expand out on this priority scale of, okay, let's say they're in a pretty solid place in all 4 of these seats. What would be the next point of focus? If there are more expansive amount of funds and more resources, how do you distribute them if these races sort of lock in? Well, under that assumption, right, these states locking in Michigan and Georgia, it would imply as well the Democrats are locking in some of these, extraneous races like New Hampshire. But I would say those would be the next point of focus for the Democratic Party. But in terms of direct impact on where they think they would have the greatest chance at flipping a seat here, 2 states come to mind: Ohio and Texas. Now, I know it might be shocking to see 2 states that Donald Trump won by double digits in the last election, but I think it also speaks to how bad this Senate map and math is really for the Democratic Party. But allow me to explain. In Ohio, this is a state that voted for Donald Trump by 11 points in 2024, but Sherrod Brown, the incumbent Democrat who had been serving in Congress since 2006, he was in the Senate since 2006. He ran in 2006. I believe he had served as governor in the state as well. He went on to represent Ohio until 2024 when he lost by roughly 4 points. So Donald Trump was winning the state by 11. Ohio went to the Republicans by 4 against Sherrod Brown because he is that likable of a Senate Democrat. Voters really responded to him well, and he's running for re-election in 2026. Decided that in 2024 he was not going to take time off from politics, instead was going to focus on trying to flip Ohio in 2026. And there's a chance that he does, right? If they invest the amount of money there, if they have the resources, and John Husted, let's say, for whatever reason, in a more nationalized race and is under more scrutiny, does find himself in a bad position, Ohio could find itself electing a Democratic senator in 2026 under the right environment. New Hampshire is just a focus here. Chris Pappas is running in an open race. He's going to have a very easy time. John Sununu wants to run there. Scott Brown's already announced that he is going to run. I don't imagine either of those two are even going to come close to victory. But either way, if Democrats are worried about, shoring up their races, that's going to be one that they're going to focus on. But either way, New Hampshire's there, Ohio, and the rest are going to be quite interesting. So, taking a look at the final race that we've characterized on this outskirts periphery as states that are going to be more interesting, you have the state of Texas, where it really does come down to who the Republicans nominate, who the Democrats nominate, and just the overall national environment as the generic ballot potentially improves or gets worse for the Democratic Party. Texas right now is a state where, assuming all goes well for the Democratic Party, should be on this outside, periphery of priority for them. Ohio and New Hampshire and Texas, I think, can be lumped together because they probably aren't going to need to spend money on New Hampshire and Ohio and Texas unless they can for sure feel like they're in a comfortable place in these top 4 races. Obviously, they'll take highest priority, but if Democrats do want a conceivable pathway to the Senate majority, it actually happens through Texas, it happens through Ohio, and certainly they would have to hold on to the state of New Hampshire. Now, that's all it for the Democratic states that I'm going to characterize as priority. The rest of them are going to be pretty locked in. Royce White is running in Minnesota. He's going to easily throw that race to the Democrats. Colorado and New Mexico are both states that Democrats are going to win by double digits, potentially by a safe margin. Virginia, not even going to be touched there. New Jersey, given the way that the trend lines are going, let's say, Jack Ciattarelli ends up winning the governor's race. Okay, that's a different story. I don't think that he will. I think Mikey Sherrill's going to pull ahead. It might be closer, but if she wins by larger than Kamala Harris did, New Jersey's not going to be great for the GOP in 2026. So, looking at the outskirt races, what are those next ones that come to mind? Where is the, next focus for the Democratic Party? Well, in terms of, and also I will say this, we've glossed over Nebraska. I do not imagine the National Democratic Party getting super involved in this race. I also don't know if Dan Osborne is going to be a vote that really helps the Democratic Party outside of the fact that he would not caucus with either side. I will say we'll revisit Nebraska at a future point. As it stands right now, given that Democrats won't run a candidate, That is the most that they will get. But Dan Osborne has been very clear. He's not caucusing with the Democratic Party. He's not in this position to benefit the Democratic Party. He's not a Democrat, and also has a long time, been a registered independent and aligned conservatively in terms of values. It just would be incrementally better for Democrats to have Dan Osborne in the Senate, just taking away a number from the Republicans in terms of them calculating their Senate majority X, Y, and Z. But I don't imagine that this is a state that they even should be investing in, that they should let Dan Osborne do his thing. He'll raise enough money, and it's not a large state, 5 electoral votes, small in population. The point is that he knows how to run his ship there. Democrats probably should allow that to be, given that if they don't, there's a chance it nationalizes the races too much, and it actually could backfire and end up hurting the candidate that they would likely want to see win. So, getting back to this, the 2 states that come to mind on this front are Iowa and Alaska. 2 states where, with the right Democrat and the right national environment, these states could be more high up in terms of priority. Now, Iowa, I think, is uniquely interesting because Democrats have a pretty strong bench, but these are not tried and tested candidates. You have state reps and you have organizers and you have people who speak the populist language that does very well in Iowa and has done very well for Donald Trump and the Republicans, who have won in this state. Ashley Hinton is sort of running this, not Joni Ernst Redux, but she's not someone who offers something substantively new to the voters in Iowa. So I'd be very interested to see exactly how much Democrats can actually move the margin and move the needle on this, but it's very possible that they could if everything goes correctly. Because in 2018, it was the Democrats who took that race on the House level and flipped 2 seats here, making it so there were a majority of Democrats from Iowa than there were Republicans. And they were actually about 5 points away from having an entire Democratic delegation in Iowa in 2018. So blue waves can bring some very weird results, and Iowa might be one of those states where maybe you could see something like that happen. Alaska, I think it largely depends if Mary Peltola enters into the race. I keep this on the outside of the priority scale. I think I'd probably bump it over more into Texas territory because I do think with a strong Democrat like Peltola, you are able to contest this race. You are able to find a feasible pathway to victory, but it's not super easy. Dan Sullivan will be the favorite even against Mary Peltola. She lost in 2024. Looking at 2026, she would have a fighting chance, but that is the most I'd give her, a fighting chance. She would not be the favorite. She would not be the easiest one here. If she runs for governor, though, clear favorite, likely D-race. But as it stands right now, I'd err on the side of caution, and that Alaska could be a target for Democrats, but it's not going to be primary and number 1. So that really brings us to, the priority scale here. Where are the 9 races, Democratic and Republican, the Democrats should be focusing on in 2026? It leaves me with this map. I don't imagine that, unlike 2020 when Democrats were spending $100 million in South Carolina and $80 million in Montana and $100 million in Kansas and $100 million in Kentucky, I don't think that will be the case, and I don't think that they should. Florida should not be targeted here. I do not think this race is going to be competitive. I do not think the Democrats should fall into this trap of believing that Florida is within reach. It's going to take a decade at least for Florida to return back to being one that Democrats could come within reason. I don't think it's going to happen. I think that these states in particular, the 9 that are here, take out the 3 Democratic seats, Georgia, New Hampshire, and Michigan. The 6 that are currently Republican held should be, targeted on this scale. But in terms of Democrats finding a feasible pathway to the majority in 2026, it would likely go through this map. And it would likely end up not with Democrats winning the Senate majority in 26, but setting them up well for a 2028 or 2030 victory that could help them when it comes down for time for the new census, when it comes down time for potentially, another Democratic administration. We'll see with these 9 seats here, Democrats at 44, Republicans at 47, and an overall map here that brings the Democrats to, potentially a majority. And so thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, then a playlist for my 2026 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.